Hi, folks. Steve Urban here, founder and CEO at recruiting and consulting firm Riderflex. If you think today's tip or guest interview can help someone you know, please share this with them. And if you enjoy listening to our show, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button on the episodes. Finally, aside from our podcast, our day job here at Riderflex is to provide recruiting, staffing, and consulting services. You can visit riderflex.com to learn more about us and get the information on the services we provide. And now, a quick word from our sponsor and friends at Marketing 360.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
Tom Regan, thank you so much for being back on the Riderflex podcast. You're my good friend. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me, Steve. Am I the second-time guest?
No, there's been some others on for a second time, but I mean, you are like way up there as the special guest, because if it wasn't for you, first of all, I would have never even entered any type of cannabis experience, which opened so many doors for me professionally and our recruiting firm, which is probably about 30% cannabis right now. Riderflex, probably 30% cannabis. You gave us that first shot, and you helped me and Scott get this whole thing started back when we met with you and had some beers and said, hey, we're thinking about starting a recruiting firm. And you're like, okay, well, you should do this, 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 and this.
Yeah,
so thank you.
You guys
sir.
Done an amazing job. Yeah, thank you. I mean, you kind of righted the ship for our retail when you joined. We were kind of adrift, and you added some discipline that actually really pushed us forward. So thank you.
Well, for the listeners, Tom Regan was the president of Mindful, a big cannabis outfit in Colorado. That's where we met. I worked there with Tom for a little bit before Riderflex. And then when Riderflex, the recruiting firm, started, Tom was gracious enough to give us our very first search assignment, VP of Sales, that we did for Mindful. So like 700 placements ago for our recruiting firm, you gave us the very first search.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, that person made a big difference in our company as well. So
I appreciate your help.
Yeah, he really did. He facilitated our growth on the wholesale side and actually helped us through our exit. So,
well, for the listeners too, just so they know, Tom has been an advisor for Riderflex since the beginning. Has given us so much advice, lots of introductions, great friend to the company. Really appreciate you, sir. I thought it'd be great for you to come back on the podcast now that Mindful was sold and you spent 7 years traveling back and forth from Boston. I thought, man, what a great episode. Let's get Tom to tell the listeners what that was like. Why don't you start though, real quick, just a quick reminder for the listeners. Give us some personal stuff, family, kids, just a little bit of personal so they'd get an idea of the risks that you took with some of the family stuff, early career, before cannabis. Really fast, a quick overview there if you don't mind.
Of course, sure. So I'm from the Boston area. I went to school out here at Northeastern, and then I got a graduate degree at Boston College, worked in high tech, a bunch of different startups. Earlier in my career in product development, supply chain, manufacturing. And then I was at two companies startups that got bought by Cisco Systems. In about a little less than a year's time, I left one and then Cisco bought that company, and we went public in the interim. And then
you made millions. Cisco. You made several $1 million when Cisco bought the startups you were with.
Yeah. Enough to put a down payment on a house. And then I stayed at Cisco for about 10 years. I was a director in the supply chain and then in the new product introduction groups with the team pretty much globally. It was a lot of fun. Mexico, Thailand, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Czech Republic,
cool.
Geneva. So it's fun. I get to meet a lot of people from all over the world and manage the Cisco team, and it was a blast. And then I left Cisco, started my own small with the two founders, started a small software company, and then one of my old partners, Jeff White, called me, and he had invested a lot of money in a little startup in Denver growing some crops, and Jeff called me and said, come on out. And I said, what's going on? I happened to be in Kansas City visiting H&R Block with that software company I'd started. And Jeff said, come to Denver. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, just come to Denver. And so I booked a flight. It was about an 1.5-hour flight, and landed in Denver. And I said, Jeff, what the heck's going on? And he's like, well, I didn't want to tell you, but I've invested a bunch of money in a cannabis outfit, and I really want you to help. And I tried to get out of the car, and he locked it. And that was in 2014. And that's my entry into the cannabis space, which interesting though, it's a lot like high tech, because in high tech, you kind of have to invent a lot of things that don't exist because you're always moving forward, new technology, next step, what's next. Cannabis is very much like that because of its history, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure or experienced management or even operators. So it was everything we did. Steve, you were part of it. Everything we did, we were kind of doing for the first time with like a small cadre of people in the United States doing it as well.
So 2014 or 2013 when you landed in Denver?
2014.
And when was Cannabis past rec in Colorado when?
2014.
Oh, that was okay. Had it already?
January 14.
Did it pass before Jeff called you, or he called you right after that?
Right after, yeah. Jeff had jumped in. Jeff was an angel investor. He and I worked together at a couple high-tech startups. He did do very well and took a little break and retired and jumped back into the cannabis industry.
So you fly to Denver. You're a supply chain operations executive who had started his own tech company and was trying to get that going with a couple of founders. You were living outside of Boston with your wife and how many kids?
Four kids.
You had 4 kids in school. You fly to Denver, and Jeff's like, "Hey, man, I put a bunch of money in this cannabis company. Come see it." And so had you ever even been in a cannabis facility? Had you ever walked through a grow? Had you ever even smoked pot? Have you ever? I mean, what?
No. My wife used to make fun of me when we'd meet people. She's like, my husband never really, partook. To me, when I was in college, I was probably drinking way too much beer.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, but no, I'd never been in a cannabis. It's funny that when I first went into the Mindful Grow, it was amazing. It was scary. But I would lean against the wall in the grow rooms because I didn't know that by touching I thought if you touched the plant while it was growing, if you got the crystals on your hand, you could get high. I didn't understand that you had to heat it up. Yeah. I hope the folks that work with me, they already know the stories, but now they're going to be embarrassed that I was their boss. But it was humbling. Wow. It was very humbling, Steve. I mean, you come from a high tech thing. At Cisco, I'm a director. There's only 70,000 people. There's maybe a couple thousand people at the director and VP level. 2,000 out of 70,000. So I was kind of at the top of that organization. Yeah, not the very top, but and then to go into a cannabis operation where I was a student for a very long time. That's the first thing I learned is don't go in and think, just because you're the boss, you're the boss. I was a student for a very long time, still am.
Did Jeff say, "Hey, come be the COO or president, or come lead his ops"? Like, what was he trying to talk you into at the time?
He wanted me to be the president. So he said, "Come on out, be the president." Our strategy back then was really kind of get things humming in Colorado, and we were expecting other states to come online in 2014. That's now happened in the last 7 years, but it's taken 7 years. I think Jeff and Kevin, the other partner, were really thinking that that was going to happen in like a 3-year time frame, not 7 years.
And that's why so when you went back to talk to your wife, you said, "Hey, this is a 3-year project. I can probably commute. We don't have to relocate the kids right now because they were all in school." And you were thinking, "I could probably fly back and forth for 2 or 3 years. No big deal." Was that the plan?
Yeah, I think I never mentioned 3 years though.
Oh, okay.
I think the thought was 12 to 18 months, kind of nail down some of the metrics, some of the operating, kind of get the business, reconsolidate or restart elements of the business, kind of get some discipline, do some strategic hiring of which you were part of, key folks, key contributors. That would be 12 to 18 months. And then once that would kind of, get that up and operating with a good support infrastructure, a team, like a scaffolding, and then then I would move closer because the next state that was going to go was Massachusetts in the pipeline, legislatively or voter referendum. So Steve, the thought was, get 12 to 18 months, lay the foundation. They had a good foundation, but kind of, get it so it could scale. That's what I've always done is I get into small businesses and try to scale them. I really enjoy that. And so that was the pitch to my wife. I think I had one in high school, two in middle school, and one in elementary school at that time.
How did you do that, Tom? Did you go home and say, hey, how'd that conversation sound with your wife? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm rubbing my face. So my wife has always, she'll never see this, but I'm not just saying it so she'll hear it, but my wife has always been really the risk taker. She's always pushed me like me. Okay. I'm not afraid of taking risks and doing stuff, but I'll analyze the heck out of it and then, come out of a tunnel and make a move. My wife is more like, no, you got to go for this. And Jeff and I worked together back in the mid to late 90s at a startup together.
So she knew Jeff. Okay.
She knew Jeff, trusted Jeff. We've had success. Okay. I followed Jeff to one of those Cisco companies that
that helped. Okay. So that helped
with Jeff. But also my wife has been, she's been really the one to say to me, go for it. Like, I'll be like, well, we have kids or whatever. She's like, no, go for it. So she kind of has that go for it. She's fearless, right? She's like, no, let's give it a go. But, 12 to 18 months was the plan.
How are your kids? Were they like, wow, this is cool. My dad's going to be in cannabis.
No, it wasn't so cool. In 2014, there was still a real Steve. I mean, you made the decision in 15 or 16.
Yes. Right. It was really scary.
Colorado was kind of a bubble, right? It wasn't representative of the rest of the country. Maybe California was ahead of
yeah, but 14 and 15, people were trying to work in the business and not tell anybody.
Exactly. And for me, for my kid, that was my biggest concern. I'm because I don't live my life by what others really think of me other than my kids and my family, my mom, close friends. But other than that, I really don't live for whatever the people think. I care, but it's not as important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my kids were my biggest concern, and it was hard for them, I think, because in Massachusetts we had passed medical, but it hadn't been through that, that regulatory process where it was out. Massachusetts was probably third or fourth in the state behind Washington, Oregon, California, and Colorado. Then Massachusetts. So it was
early on.
Hard. My kids got teased a little at school. They didn't care.
I was going to ask. Okay.
All right. But we didn't. My wife and I, we've never raised our kids to really care what teasing or whatever, right? I mean, it's, so my kids really, they were good about it. I think, some embarrassing moments where somebody's like, oh, your dad's selling pot, especially my younger ones. But as this thing moved into 15, 16, 17, all of a sudden it became, from them cool.
Right. Because then those same parents were like, oh, okay, maybe he did do the right thing. Early on, when
if you don't mind sharing your wife, we talked to Kim. I met Kim, and Kim was looking at us like, I got to check these guys out. Are these guys?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
She wanted, your wife the same way. If she wasn't behind you, but it wasn't, I'm not going to make it sound like a martyr. There was people that went before me and you that went to jail, right?
But we were early.
We owe everything to those folks. And
that's true. A lot of people went to jail. Now for me and you, it was legally okay, but still it was, people, I can only imagine when you walked into
bank accounts that shut down back then, they were still, it was, a couple of my partners and, people in Colorado were like, hey, what's your getaway plan? I'm like, getaway from what? Like fire escape? But no, because people weren't sure what the federal government was going to do.
That's right. Totally.
Still true. I remember that was a lot of your questions too. You were like, hey, what happens if the federal government turns this around?
I remember my wife and I came down to meet you and Jeff at the at the mindful cannabis operation. Kim was like, well, let's check this out. And so I remember
she drilled us. I mean, she put our throats, she put her hand on our throats and kept asking. But you have to do, I mean, in any job though, it's, if you're going to make a change and it impacts your family or your spouse or your partner, then you gotta, I mean, we loved it. I thought it was awesome.
What was the crazy? Well, this is a whole podcast, right? We could do a 3-hour podcast on crazy cannabis stories, but give me like, think of like maybe just one great crazy ass example of something. I don't know, either an employee issue or something where you're just like, you call your wife that night and go, holy shit, I don't know if I could do this.
There were some 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I'd wake up and say, what the hell am I doing? There was the one thing that surprised me was there was the crazy story. I mean, there was a story where we the folks that had started the company had done a deal with a dispensary owner up north.
Okay.
Near one of the colleges.
Okay.
And the guy that did the deal totally misrepresented everything. His license was on hold by the municipality that granted it to him in Denver, that gave him the right to do it. The state, therefore, had his license on hold. He basically was out of business and totally falsified all his documents, and to no fault of the folks, the executives at Mindful, he had basically falsified everything, and they bought a store from him that he had no right selling and was basically out of business. So then we go up to see him. I'm just brand new, and we go up to see him, and I walk in the store, and he is off his rocker. I don't know. He
Crazy.
was impaired. He was impaired, and it wasn't cannabis. I mean, he was on some really painkillers. I don't know. And we're in the store, and one of our partners was really a hardcore guy, smart guy, but very much a businessman.
I think I know who you're talking about. I won't mention his name.
Great guy, good guy. And he was there. Yeah. Older fella. And he was in the store, and he saw that guy, and he almost lost it. And then all of a sudden the city's cannabis inspector comes in and says, what are you guys doing here? And we're like, oh, well, we're going to, we bought this. We just bought this. And he's like, well, that's pretty funny because this is going out of business and we're not issuing a license. So good luck with that. Needless to say, the 2-hour ride back to Denver was quiet.
Oh boy. There's so many stories, right? And Tom, just the whole transformation of old school, the cannabis people who took a lot of risks, and I highly respect them because back in the day, like you said, when they were risking jail time and all kinds of stuff, but to watch those personalities transition with real business executives like yourself, and watch those conference room meetings where you got some old school guys who've been growing weed illegally for 25 years, trying to sit around a conference table with 2 guys from Cisco.
Yeah. Steve, it's funny though, and I think you did a good job with this too. And we talked a lot about it because you're kind of the same, you've been a COO, a CEO, you've been the top person in the company. The one of the things I learned right away, and our other partner, Kevin Daly, and some of the other partners really made a good point of, when I get in, even though I wasn't, a cannabis user in a big way, I'm not, prude or anything. It just wasn't, my thing. And then once I started a family, they taught me to have respect for the culture. So the big thing, I think this is true of anyone joining a culture, from if you change industries or whatever, there is a culture, right? There's a language, there's a lingo. Like if you're a defense contractor, right? There's a lingo, all these acronyms or whatever. And everyone in that tribe or that culture knows the terms, and they use those terms to communicate in a way that an outsider wouldn't. Same with like in software and high tech software, people and engineers have a way of computing. Same thing. Okay, so for me, to your point, the trick for me was, how do I show respect and an appreciation for that culture that has done so much, but at the same time bring together the discipline that maybe can help them scale to another level. That was probably the hardest part of my job.
And that's the magic, Tom. That's what you were so good at. And that is the magic of a cannabis executive that comes in from the outside. You've got to balance that. The personalities, the cultures, all of that has to mix together to scale. And that is not easy to do.
No. And I think you still, to your point though, you have to be true to your values, right? I saw a quote by James Mattis, right? Who's a general. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was from like one of the Stoics, but it was basically like the first part is figuring out what your values are. But the second part, which is harder, is figuring out what you won't do. Not what you will do, but what you won't do. So for me, that was the hardest part. There was accepting the culture, and then there was this corporate culture, and they weren't necessarily, I mean, some of the best operators I met were from that cannabis culture. They just didn't have the toolkit. They didn't, they could hammer a nail in with whatever it took, right? Like a carpenter, but all of a sudden you showed them like some tools that were corporate.
Like a nail gun. Yeah, like a nail gun.
And they're like, and then all of a sudden they would go on to levels that I didn't even dream about. So there was that culture. But the hard part for me was not what on the corporate side and what on the cannabis culture side, what would mesh and be good. The hardest part for me was what wouldn't I do, or what wouldn't I want the company to do? And there were certain things that were non-negotiable. Like we weren't going to do anything illegal or irresponsible. We weren't going to stay in compliance. We had to treat the employees with respect. That was the hard part, I think. Because
turnover was also super high in cannabis, right? I mean, especially at the entry level. Why was that, Tom? Was it because a lot of the entry level workers came in and thought it was going to be play day, and then they were like, "Oh, wow, this is real work"? Or why was the turnover so heavy for every cannabis company for entry level associates?
I think and it's not just a cannabis thing, Steve. I agree with you. I think any emerging business or culture has that, right? Like I'll give you an example that I saw at High Tech. Jeff and I and my wife were at a company called 𝐂𝐲𝐶𝐬, and they were doing dial-up. For those of you that don't know what dial-up is, it's that modem sound before Wi-Fi and broadband. We used the phone line to dial up, and right before I joined the company, it was run by a bunch of brilliant MIT engineers, but they were all 25. So in those meetings, they were throwing F-bombs and screaming at each other and slamming doors, and it wasn't that culture was never. It was brilliant in the innovation stage, but because of some of those cultural drawbacks of running it like a fraternity or a sorority, you weren't able to scale, and it became insular. And that group, they became very insular. And then as you added on people and systems to make the company bigger and stronger, that culture had to break down. And the same thing in cannabis, you had an insular culture that was not trusting, let's face it, of law enforcement or authority, because for obvious reasons. So anyway, I'm blabbing on about that, but that was a real trick for us, is to say, hey, we're going to hold you accountable, and we're going to hold myself accountable and the team accountable, but we expect results. We're all here for results, and nobody benefits if we blow this thing up, but retain the culture. And the same thing I'd say to people we brought in, like you, and we're like, Steve, because you looked at me, some of the stuff we were going, I'm like, see, we're going through a cultural transition here. And you're like, Tom, you can't let this keep happening. Like, no, but it was good to have people like you around me. You're like, Tom, this is going to be a problem, right? And sometimes you can be that, you can be the frog in the boiling pot as well, and not see that things are right. And you bring in people from the outside and inside and get the best. I mean, when I joined, there was 83 people, I think, in the company. And there was a core of 20 people that went all the way 7 years with us, almost.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And how many people in the end, Tom? How big did you grow it?
93.
93, yeah. And
we only added 10 people, but we grew the revenue by almost tenfold.
I was going to say, I don't know if you can share the specific revenue, but I think you increased the revenue by tenfold, and then had a successful exit, by the way, where you sold. I think this is it public knowledge who Mindful sold to? Can we share that on the podcast? Or
they haven't made an announcement, but it's public. They made an announcement for the retail part, so it's cool.
Mindful sold to LiveWell, right? LiveWell, that is based in Colorado. Okay. Yeah. So you grew it 10. So you came in to an operation that was started but not running not running efficiently and wasn't ready to scale. You changed all that as the leader for the operations over there and grew it tenfold, and then helped the executive team take it to a successful exit. Congratulations.
Yeah. Well,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah. And thank you for that. And Steve, I clearly, it wasn't just me. Kevin, Jeff, some of the other partners early on, they gave me the latitude to do the hard things.
Well, you know what was so
they gave
great.
Me some latitude. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just me. If they didn't give me the latitude, I probably would have left or become frustrated, but the founders of that company and the partners gave me the latitude to do what I want to do. And they didn't always agree with me. And I did a lot of things that after the fact, they were like, what the hell? But,
but your ability to navigate, Tom, I think it really is a special skill set to navigate personalities and styles and cultures and put them all in a pot and stir them up and make a good soup. It is very hard to do, and to have the patience to sit there and stir it and season the soup, right? Like for me, for my personality, I didn't have the patience to do that. I was so type A. I mean, I guess most leaders are type A, but you were a patient enough type A to where you allowed things to unfold in a timely manner that most people wouldn't have the patience for. And you did that really, really well. And that's every time we're recruiting an executive into cannabis, we'll get people from Chevron, Coca-Cola, Kraft or whatever. They're like, I want to be in cannabis. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about it.
No, I think, but to your point, I mean, you came in you and I are similar in that respect. I mean, if you're not, it's a cliche, but I feel like if you're not, a bad decision is better than no decision. And I know you agree with that. Like, you've got to move forward. Like, so the thing that was humbling for me was I had a lot to learn. And I think that forced me to be a little more humble than I normally am.
Gotcha.
And it's almost that insecurity of maybe I don't have all the answers, but I think, but it's a good mix though, Steve. We had a good mix on the executive team and the founding team. That some people were like more analytical. We had you, I mean, in your role, you were just like, come on, let's go. And I mean, you made some big moves too. I mean, what we did up in that store, not the one we talked about earlier, but the one that was existing up in Berthoud. I mean, you walked in and you made some changes that everybody in the company hated, right? And no, but I mean, but you called me and said, we're going to do it. And we did it, right? I mean, like, one of the things, not that I'm a genius. I mean, you've got to leave room for people of all personalities. You walked in there and I asked you to do a job, and you walked in and said, I can't do the job with what you gave me. Everybody in the company except for you and I said it had to happen.
I remember that.
But we did it.
I remember that.
But we did it. I mean, you left that store better than you found it by a magnitude of like.
I wonder whatever happened to those guys.
Well, yeah, honestly, I know this is a podcast. I don't care what happened to them. No, but you came in and talking about culture. You came into me and said, listen, I know, and I think a lot of people get it. If I can go on a tangent, Steve, I think I saw this in high tech as well. And a lot of people go into a company and they have somebody that is, oh my God, this woman she's brilliant. She's tough. She's the best employee we have. She's the most results-driven person in the company. But one problem, nobody wants to work with her.
Right.
Or him, right? Or nobody wants to work with him. And then a lot of managers, and I've done this in my past, I'm like, well, I'll make excuses. Well, but look at their results. You have to. But I didn't realize that as a leader, a lot of people don't look at that. They say, oh, well, Tom let Jim or Jane just go off and they're toxic. Everyone that works with them comes down and gets sick or beaten down or quit. And then you go to Tom and he says, oh, well, yeah, but Jane's brilliant or Jim's brilliant. You don't realize that what that does is that one person's contribution may be brilliant, but it's not just about the results. You've got like a vine that is,
that's right.
From that fruit is toxic. And I made this mistake many times, Steve, and this is what you pointed out to me. Like, you went to that store and said, Tom, these guys are good, they're competent, but there's a real issue up here where, there's a culture issue and this place is radioactive. And No, it was, right? And I
Yeah,
think just the
yep.
lesson, I know I'm blabbing on about it, but the lesson I learned, and I put up with people like that, it's almost like a no asshole rule, right?
It
Like
is.
I
It
put up
is.
with people, I said,
Yep.
but their contribution is brilliant and they're assholes, so we put up with it. But the rest of the company, 80 other people were looking at me and they knew, and they're judging you. Don't think they're not judging you as a leader, whether you're a shift supervisor,
That's
the
right.
CEO of the company, or the president of the world, right? Whatever you are, everyone's looking at you the way you treat others. And they're like,
No
well,
doubt.
Tom's making an exception or Steve's making an exception.
Yes.
What the hell? And
That's right.
and that's a hard lesson, because as a manager, you're all about the results, and then, or a leader, but then if those results come with the baggage of toxicity
Yes.
and I learned that, and you know, you helped me learn it up there. And that
Tom,
is-
what would you say to an executive with no cannabis experience that wants to get in now? Let's just hypothetically say we were interviewing, I don't know, a CFO candidate for a cannabis company, and they're coming from Nike.
Yeah.
What would you tell him? What would him or her?
Three things. It's a great question. And if I told myself, or we'll just use me 7 years ago, we've already talked about this. Be humble. Always be a learner.
Yep.
Be a learner. Don't, it's different. Be humble. Go in there and learn. You're first and foremost a student. And I would recommend anyone get out into the grow operation or the retail operation or the extraction operation. Go work there for a week. Go work there for a week. It'll do wonders. We had a grower at Mindful. He still tells everyone that starts company, goes, you wouldn't believe it. Tom was out here for like 2 weeks, like getting wet and plants around. They wanted me to get the hell off the floor, but I'll tell you what, walk a mile in their shoe. Be humble. So number one, and a learner. Number two, don't, just because it's cannabis, I call it business physics. The physics, gravity on this planet we live on is the same for you and me, Steve. I can't. And the same thing with, there's certain things in business that count. Cash flow is important.
Cash flow is king.
It's oxygen, right? Without cash flow, it's oxygen, right?
That's right.
Those physics still applying. Just because it's cannabis doesn't mean the laws of business or the rules of business, and there's no laws, but you know what I mean? The laws of physics still apply to you. Gravity's gravity. It's still the same gravity, you know, for Tom as it is for somebody that's been in cannabis for 10 years. So that basis you learn, that business experience you have with dealing with people and balance sheets and financial statements, those rules still apply.
Those rules still apply. That's right.
Yeah. And then the final thing is, and I just used that quote, it's about Mattis, right? In cannabis, you're going to see some things that you've never seen. Even now, the business has grown up a little. Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Stay true to your values. What are you prepared to say no to?
That's a great one, Tom.
I think you know what I mean? I just saw that one, Stephen. It really encapsulates for me, because I've always been prepared to what I'll say yes to, but I never think in a negative context, not negative, but a counter, you know, a negative, meaning a film, the opposite of that. What am I non-negotiables?
I love that, Tom.
So I'd say be humble, be a learner. Business physics still apply. Don't let anyone, you'll come in and say, oh, it's not that way in cannabis. My answer to that is bullshit. A balance sheet is still a balance sheet, and a P&L is still a P&L. And then the final thing is just be prepared. Know where you'll draw that line, where
I like that. Your
personal system, what you'll say no to, what you'd be willing to say yes to.
What happens now, Tom, with cannabis and CBD? And when I say cannabis, let's just, I kind of mean the THC and CBD side. What happens now? Does Big Pharma and Coors and Coca-Cola and all these giant companies just take over, and and then they partner with giant farmers and across the country, and all the small people go out of business? Or what happens now?
Yeah, I love this question, Steve, because I think it's, the way I look at it, this is the automotive industry in 1910.
Okay.
Ford, maybe, I don't know, I think Dodge, the Dodge brothers worked for Ford. Detroit's starting to become, what's going to happen to the automobile next, right? There's kind of roads, there's not roads. Or the alcohol, spirits and alcohol in 1930 something, once prohibition was lifted, right? What's going to happen?
Yep.
So my point, I love business models that existed before. Like, instead of reinventing the wheel, go back into history and find a benchmark or a parallel that might apply. So to answer your question, I think two things. I think it's funny, like this whole hemp and CBD thing has kind of become a proxy for THC and cannabis, right? Like it's the federal government with the Farm Bill said CBD derived from hemp is legal, but CBD derived from cannabis isn't. So it's kind of, no, but it's a proxy, right? It's almost like you can buy wine, but you can't buy whiskey.
Right.
So a lot of people, I think where the industry goes from what you're talking about, a bigger consolidation, I think all of the states now have created tax revenue. In Colorado, for example, I think a lot of that money is earmarked to education. That money wasn't available. There still was a cannabis market in Colorado. It wasn't legitimate in the sense that it was legal. So there was still money changing hands and product being delivered. The state has now found a way to derive. I think they passed almost like $500 million or $1 billion in tax revenue that the state never had access to. A lot of that money's going to education. A lot of it's going to help the state. So all these states that have passed and have now have a bounty of revenue, tax revenue, it's not, I consider revenue earned, but tax dollars that the state is taxed, they're not going to say no to that. They're not going to let that go. So if you have a federal prohibition lifted, I think the states are going to still derive it like hold on to it like alcohol, right? You need, in Colorado to distribute Corona, you need a license to distribute in Colorado. You can't just come into Colorado and start,
That's right. You got to have your liquor license. You got to have a liquor license, whatever.
So I think each state is going to be kind of a micro climate or economy like it is now. But the one thing that is a big question mark is, are you going to have big giant distilleries or cannabis grows in certain states, and then it's going to be delivered to Colorado, and like liquor, you're going to have a license to distribute? My guess is no. I think the states derive a lot of, I think the states are going to still want their control and their tax revenue. And once you have a state deriving tax revenue, it's real hard to reverse that. So I think I think where the play goes, I think the 𝐀𝐝𝐶s and the 𝐂𝐝𝐶s and the 𝐂𝐶ores and constellations in the business, I think they're going to move up the value chain into how do you have hemp and cannabis derived products, edibles, consumer packaged goods, distribution, marketing, like a mature company. I think that's where they're going to go.
I see. Will states eventually say, hey, whoever wants a license can buy one? This is how much it costs. Do you think that'll ever happen?
I don't see it, Steve, not in the next 10 years, only because of that tax revenue. I know in Massachusetts, they're getting tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year that they never had access to, and it's going right to the state. How does the federal government come in and say to the state, hey, we're removing the federal prohibitions, that tax revenue is gone. Right?
So those licenses that people are paying tens of millions of dollars for, like Chicago, didn't Chicago just pass out some licenses? Will the value of those licenses hold, or do you think over time they'll pass out more licenses and the value of that comes down? What happens there?
I think mostly the latter, and I think the companies that will derive the higher value will move up the value chain. They'll take the bud and extract it into oil, and then that oil will be distilled or refined into an ingredient that goes into a consumer packaged good, like an edible, like a cookie or a bomb, or I think. But by that I mean the value chain. You keep moving up by using technology and branding to move up and create greater value. I think those companies are going to do the best.
Okay,
But some states, Steve, like Oklahoma, right? Like. I think you have a
yep. That's where I grew up. Yep.
Yep. You're an Okie, right? And Oklahoma gave out a ton of licenses, and they just did it indiscriminately. All you had to do was fill out the paperwork and get a license, right? So I think in Oklahoma, it because the barrier to entry is not high, I think those licenses aren't trading for the premiums like a state like Illinois that's had a restrictive licensing. Eventually, that's all going to shake out as well, though. To your point.
Okay, let me ask you this too, and I know we're over on time, but I want to get a few more questions in here. I know what THC does to me, right? As a user, I know that if I'm at the campsite sitting around a campfire and I light up a joint, I know what it does to me, right? I feel it. It has an effect on me. CBD, and I'm gonna probably piss off some of my listeners here. Like CBD, like I'm waiting for that result, right? I see all these CBD products. Everybody I know is like, I'm starting a CBD company. I'm like, okay, man, there's a million of them.
Yeah.
You know, I've rubbed CBD on my arthritis pain in my neck. I've used CBD products. I've been doing all this stuff. As a consumer, I'm not convinced it's doing anything for me yet, Tom, on this CBD. When it first started rolling out, it's like, oh, CBD is going to be the cure all for everything. You know, rub it on whatever pain you have and poof, it's better. That hasn't happened for me personally.
Yeah. I think your story, I think your narrative there is for a lot of people. And I think there's two reasons.
Okay.
There's a lot of people out there taking CBD and just throwing it into something. So like a cream.
Okay.
But they don't really know anything about how a cream, you know, transitions from the top of your skin through your skin as a barrier into, you know, there's a medicinal side, right? Of that, like icy hot, right? Like, you know, and I think there's also inferior CBD products out there. It's become almost like the superfruit. Remember pomegranate or quinoa, like, right? There's always a superfruit, blueberries, right? It's almost like a trendy, CBD became two things. It became a trendy, hey, I can consume cannabis, but I don't have to do it like on the scary part of the cannabis for some people, right? And I think there's another thing called, you know, a lot of folks in the industry called the entourage effect, right? And I explain that to people, like, you need some element of THC and some element of CBD. And those things are natural in the plant and they play off of each other. If you extract or derive just CBD or just the THC component from it without keeping those two things together, you don't get the full benefits of the plant. And I think so you've got some inferior CBD out there. You've got people making false claims, you know, around it. They don't know how to do the formulations. And I think, you know, you do need an element of both, of balance of THC and CBD to get the intended effects. And if you just pull out all the THC, like the analogy I use, it's probably the people that follow the science and cannabis will probably laugh at me, but the analogy I use is like a lemon. You've got the tart and the sweet. If I pulled the sweet out of a lemon, it wouldn't be a lemon anymore. And if I pulled out all the sweet, you know, out of the lemon or left the sweet and pulled out the tart, you know what I mean? You need that, for the full, you know, the full spectrum of a lemon's taste, right? You need that. It's the interplay of those two things, the sweet and the tart. And I'm using a taste analogy, but I think from a medicinal, those two things work on your body in a certain way, and there has to be both elements to get the full effects. Okay.
All right. Very good. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
I probably blew the science on it, Steve, but I mean, just as an analogy.
So what's next for Tom Regan right now? I mean, there's very few, when you think about, I don't know how many people in America right now, 360 million or whatever it is. I don't know. So all these people walking around in the United States, there really are, when you think about just the volume, the percentage, right? There is a tiny group of people walking around that come from major companies like Cisco that went into cannabis, grew the company tenfold, and exited. You've got all this experience. You are in this very special group now of executives that have that experience. I mean, literally, there just aren't that many people. If somebody called Riderflex, our recruiting firm, and said, hey, find me an executive that came from a huge company that went into a small startup cannabis company, spent 7 years, turned it around, grew it by tenfold, and took it to an exit. Like, if we had that challenge to find that person as a search firm, that'd be tough to do. There's not a lot of those guys. So you're in a very select group. So my point is, and my question is, what is next for Tom with all of this valuable experience? What's Tom doing next?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we just completed the transition of our assets in June. So I'm kind of taking a deep breath because the first, we didn't get, and I know you traveled like crazy too.
Yes.
But for the first probably 3 years of those 7, I was in Denver every week from Boston.
I know.
Friday night. So
I don't know how you did that.
That was a whirlwind unto itself. And then the next 3 or so years, my partners and the team we built out there enabled me to make it every other week. So I'm taking a little breather right now, Steve, but I think, you know, it's a trite answer, but I kind of, you know, and I don't know if I'll be in the cannabis business the rest of my life. I like at the start of this thing, this talk we are having, I really enjoy helping people start small, add a ton of value, build a team, create something great, scale it, and then see where it goes. So kind of at a very general level for me,
Gotcha.
I want to help people. If I can take my experience and knowledge and some of the mistakes, all the mistakes I made them all, and just kind of bring that to somebody and provide a ton of value for them and see them take that on and really blow it up. If I can help people do that,
do you want to do that as a consultant, maybe a consultant firm, or would you, if somebody called and said, come be CEO for ABC company, in North Carolina and help us scale it, would you do it?
Yeah, I would. I think, I've been managing people for the last 20, almost 30 years.
Since you got out of college, probably while you were in college.
So it's a lot of fun. I do love building a team and managing a team. So I think for the right opportunity, I wouldn't rule it out, Steve, but I'm kind of enjoying right now. I'm helping a couple small firms here locally. Some of them just call me, hey, a friend of a friend, and I give them $1 million of free advice and don't charge
I charge them $100,000.
I gotta talk. If anyone out there has any ideas on how to monetize that, I'd love to talk to you. Sorry, Steve, that's a pitch. But so I'm in that stage where for the right opportunity, I love building a small team and helping people grow and seeing what they can do.
Cannabis or non-cannabis, either one.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I've got like 5 or 6 business ideas that spur out of my cannabis experience.
Right.
Software, education, consulting, and a couple ideas on some wireless stuff. I mean, as
you grow these new companies, I know this really cool recruiting firm that can help you staff it up.
Yeah, I've used them before. They're pretty good. Kudos to you guys. I mean, you built half of my direct report team of 6 people. And those people, it's funny, in high tech, we had this thing, we called it a following, right? People would go, like I followed Jeff, right? People would go from startup to startup and follow the same people, the founders, or the executive team. And I really believe in that culture. And there's people that I've worked, those 20 people I worked with, you're amongst them. I got to know Scott through you. There's just a core of people that are trusted, that I know.
Yes.
You call a play as an executive, but believe me, I hope I'm as good a follower as a leader, because I think great leaders, that old saying, lead, follow, or get out of the way. Those are the 3 choices, right? And I think sometimes you're a follower, and there's people I would follow to the ends of the earth because I know what they've done, and I hope my dream would be if I could work with a core of people and get new people that would make that. But those 20 people I worked at.
Sounds like you're ready to start something new and pull some of those people in.
Yeah, I think they've got to figure, there's a thing where I want them to go, a lot of them are 20 years young. Steve, we're that age now, right? They're 20 years younger than us. All right. I'd like to see them go figure it out on their own and then down the road. But yeah, I mean,
Tom, are you 50? Are you 54, 55?
I'm 55. I'm 55. I can't believe it.
Isn't it, Tom? Isn't it amazing? For me, I do feel like I have more energy than most 54-year-olds, and I do honestly believe that. But I don't have the same juice I had when I was 35. I'll admit it. I just don't.
You can go hard, but just
I can go hard, but
yeah. I don't know. You and Scott have built something pretty incredible. I mean, I remember.
Well, I appreciate it.
When you guys did it, I remember we were sitting in a room, and one of my partners, I won't say his name, he told you guys you needed to get your heads examined, right?
Well, he doesn't mind. I'm sure he doesn't mind us sharing that on the podcast. By the way, I'm going camping with Jeff this coming weekend.
Awesome!
Yeah.
So, but Jeff knew you guys.
Jeff was like, "What the hell you want to do that for?" He's like, "What's wrong with you?"
He knew as being on the buy side of what you did. It's a hard.
Yes.
It's a hard.
But you guys gave us a shot, which we appreciate. Really, really quick, Tom. I know we're out of time, and let me ask you this: for people to get a hold of you, in case they're interested in some consulting services, or they want to talk to you. I know you're busy. I know you're already booked. So I don't even know if you could take on more, but if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best thing to do? Is it reach out on LinkedIn, or what do you prefer?
Yeah. So it's because I haven't figured out what I want to do next. I've been kind of like, people have come to me and said, can you help? So I've been helping on a couple projects. I'm still using my Gmail.
Okay.
So that's a great way. And I think it'll be in the show notes. But my LinkedIn is a great way to DM me. And if you reference this, and I mean this, not just what you can do for me. I mean, I really mean this. If I can help you get through a knothole and it's a quick exchange,
great.
I've learned in the past that if you can help others, I think I'm going to show my age, but a Zig Ziglar quote, right? The way to be successful is to help others realize their dreams. I can't remember the exact quote, but I think if you can help people in a small way realize what they want to do in life or in their career or with their family.
Did that for me. You did that for me, my friend. You did that for me.
Hey, look at I'm on this superstar million view podcast now. Getting to blab on about myself, which
the really podcast wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for Tom Regan. By the way, for the listeners, Tom Regan can be found on LinkedIn. It's just type in his name. You'll see it. Tom Regan, President Mindful is what it still says, but they'll probably change it to Tom Regan International Consulting Agency or something. I don't know, whatever he's going to call it. And we'll put your Gmail in the show notes as well, Tom.
Awesome.
I appreciate you, sir. Thank you so much for being on the Riderflex podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you and Scott just, keep up the great work. You guys, the courage, we didn't talk a lot about courage today, but the courage you guys showed with established careers, and you guys were pretty comfortable, and
thank you.
Made yourselves very uncomfortable by doing this. So I think, and I know we're all done, but I've just never seen you happier. I know you're working.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
You're working so hard, and I know there were a lot of lean times for you guys, and
yes,
you guys are still hustling and taking care of your people. But
that's another podcast. We got to talk about the pains and scariness of startup. We'll do that on the next show.
Yeah. We'll show scars.
Exactly.